my beloved, and he's a German naturopath, functional medicine practitioner, and kind of alchemist of healing. And he's gonna share with us his experience and the science and the healing power of the cloud Pema therapy. So take it away.
Thank you. Well, I want to welcome you all to a presentation about Centropics and primarily about the cloud. Sasha and I have been working with Centropics for about a year, actually more than a year, and we're very excited about what we see with the cloud, and that's why we're really doing this, because we just enjoy sharing about things that are really close to our heart and that are meaningful and that work from a practical standpoint in terms of helping people to turn their lives around when it comes to their own health. Yeah, so let's get started. I like the slide because this is really about that we have to kind of jump out of some of the illusion. Even that's kind of more what I associate with this. We have to jump out of the illusion and the false state of the mind and jump into a world of healing where healing is really becomes a possibility. This is just a quick disclaimer. It's just saying that we're not claiming any diseases. And in fact, I always love this slide because I love not to associate the cloud with any fixing of any kind of diseases, because the whole disease model is really reductionistic in itself. So we have to, in a way, take our whole healing perspective to a whole other dimension. And that's really what this talk is also about. So we take Nikola Tesla as one of our inspirations. In fact, the technology as it exists in the cloud is still of the technology that goes all the way back to Nikola Tesla, these copper spirals that we find in the cloud mat. And yeah, many of the other concepts and physics that are also behind the cloud. So Nikola Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy and frequency and vibration. So we're truly entering into the realm of vibrational and frequency therapy. So we all know that our body, and some of us actually don't know that, but our body is thoroughly electric. So when you look at even the ion exchanges that happen outside and inside of the cell, the flow of everything in the system is actually driven by different potentials, so different charges that different elements have and different molecules have. And that creates all the movement in the system. So our body is radically electric. And so once we understand that, then we also understand that there's good electricity and not so good electricity that affecting us. So each cell vibrates a specific frequency. That's very important because every cell in our body, and even many of our different atoms, have different requirements. So the secret now, when it also comes to the cloud, is how do you activate all these different molecules, cells, and tissues? How is this practically possible? So yes, we have entered a truly new frontier of frequency therapy, and this is really where the cloud fits in. It's kind of using science and non-invasive frequency to help activate our molecules and recharge the body. So as we age, we lose that charge, and all the function in our system are becoming less efficient. So here you see a little snapshot of some of the older devices. Now, PEMF therapy has been around since the 70s, and one can say just in the last 20 years, especially through the brilliancy of Dr. Professor Kafka, we actually have seen exponential development in this space, they say, right? So the older devices were actually rather limited and still are, because they're still sold today. In fact, there's still technology sold today that is pretty much operating on some of the technology that has been out there 40 years ago. And so we're kind of stepping out of that old realm and stepping into a complete new realm where we're actually shifting from pulse electromagnetic field therapy to molecular activation therapy. So we are really much more into molecules now and not just cells. You can also see there are like more than 20,000 studies. Obviously, there are all kinds of studies and all kinds of things. So we're really not dealing with a complete new healing technique. It's more like we're advancing with what we had before, and we're taking it to a whole other octave. And that's really exciting. You can also see that some of the older devices were rather clumsy. And we have an elegant device now that is light, portable, highly effective. So it all starts with the molecules. So here you can see these electrons dancing around. And these charges are really important because without that life energy, the Chinese call it qi or prana, or there's so many ways to address this, but it's really vital energy. And so it makes a huge difference in how we feel and how our body is operating. So the amazing and stunning reality of things is that in every cell, we have about, I think 60, some people say 100 trillion cells. And then all these cells have like trillions of atoms. And so there's so many different atoms. It's just unbelievable. And if you would think about all the physiological functions that take place every minute in our body and how little input we really have on this, it's truly amazing. And so this is exactly what we're addressing now with the cloud. We're really working on that deeper foundation of molecular activation. So here you can see that many of these molecules are operating in very different ways. Just like you can see how they're all moving in different ways, it also means they obviously might have some different requirements in terms of the input that they need in order to function properly, right? So this is really just a demonstration to show you that different molecules have different requirements. Here we see a slide on the different tissues. So this is just to bring to our awareness that our body is highly complex in there when it comes to molecular interactions, and that every tissue in a way operates from a different kind of programming. And all the molecules in all these different tissues are also operating in very kind of unique ways. So there's a humongous diversity when it comes to our body. So when we look at the evolution of frequency therapy, which really means PEMF therapy, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, we can see on the left side that the signals were rather primitive. They were called sawtooth signals, sinus wave signals, or rectangular signals. Dr. Kafka, who is also the inventor of the cloud, in 1998 already took these very rather primitive signals to a whole new octave. And that brought about this device that then 1998, interestingly, that also coincides with the discovery of the nitric oxide molecule. But anyway, so this broadband, what you see in the middle, brought about a 450,000 molecular activation in a 15-minute session. So if you would lie down at that time and you would have received a treatment, 450,000 of your molecules would have gotten activated. Now we're dealing with a whole new situation, because now we're actually dealing with 23 million molecules. So how is this possible? So we want to discover now, how did Dr. Kafka manage to take his original discovery, and how did he take that to a 23 times, or actually 50 times higher effectiveness by sophisticating the signal? So you can also see already on the right lower side, I think I showed that before. You can see that superimposition that is part of that signal, where Dr. Kafka actually multiplied many different kind of aspects of this particular signal in order to come up with these really high numbers. So the superimposition is one of the principles. So this is Dr. Kafka. And as I was just sharing with you, the molecular activation is now 50 times greater. And he has truly put his heart to work with the cloud. And so we are very grateful to him and his commitment really to the art of making this a much more effective instrument for healing. So this is a slide from Chitwan Malik's husband, Pravir, and where he kind of summarizes some of the physics of what's behind the cloud technology. So he calls it harnessing the power of electromagnetic therapy. So on the upper left corner, we see the foundation mechanism is really what's now behind this is the signal shape, the repetition of the rate, and also the hertz range. So that really creates, it's a foundation of the mechanism. So let's look at the signal basics a little bit more. So in all the devices, previous devices, we see 30 to 50 hertz were like the primary spectrum of the frequency spectrum that these devices were working on. Now with the clouds, we have expanded that to a 200 hertz spectrum. And now what makes the signal so unique is the following. It's really the energy inside the signal. And so the complexity of the signal, which you can actually see, you can kind of get an idea here. You can see the square wave signal, for example, the green one, that was like one of the original ones, like, 50 years ago or whenever that exactly was. And then it developed into the sawtooth signal. Then it became a modulated exponential form that was like the 1998 signal. And now we're really at, in 2020, the cloud came out, and you can see through the superimposition and the ability to actually fold the cloud also in the rhythmical programming that's also part of this, which we also would talk about. All of these different principles together, allowing now the cloud to have this rather sophisticated, expanded signal. So let's go back to this explanation, because this is very interesting. So we need to count. So here in the lower left corner box, you see energy inside the signal. We need to count the activation peaks, right? So So when you look here, you see so many peaks. Now, I don't have a cursor, I can't point at this, but you see it looks like a mountain range, right? With many, many different little peaks. And every of these peaks becomes like an activation in itself. So that is really what it's about. And then you see inside the field, the activation peaks are creating the frequency range. And so it's like the calculation, I actually forgot what the calculation was with the 100, but it's basically the 200 hertz and then a particular number per second, and that ends up with, you're ending up with like 20,000 hertz activation. And then due to the superimposition, that takes it basically to a whole other level. And so there, as you can see like there are 3 different locations here on this particular page where there's a mentioning of a pattern, right? So there's a superimposition pattern, which I already mentioned before. And then the next one is the entrainment. And the entrainment is another form of programming, and which I will elaborate also on. And then there is the pattern of the cloud, that you can actually fold the cloud, and that is actually demonstrated also in one of the further slides. So if we look at the right upper box here, overcoming the pattern in the body, now this is another very important piece, and that is that what's mentioned here as tachyphylaxis is really when you send a particular signal to the body and it's always the same, the body gets actually used to it. It's just kind of like if you drink dandelion tea every day, at some point you don't have an effect on your kidneys anymore because the body is kind of used to it. It's like, okay, I've experienced this, the activation has taken place over a number of weeks and months maybe, and then it wears off, and the body doesn't really respond to the herb anymore. And it's the same with the physical activation here. So the body gets used to these different rhythms if they're always the same. So the idea is actually to create a super sophisticated signal where you have these variations, like what you see here in the right upper box. It says multiple 3-minute segments, right? So every 3-minute segment has a different hertz frequency, and so the body constantly needs to adapt. That's also called homeostasis in therapy. Homeostasis basically means you activate by changing and creating a reaction in the system. So if you jump into a hot pool and then into a cold pool, that's also a form of homeostasis. So we see this homeotic principle playing out here also in this invention. And then, yes, I mentioned the foldable thing, so we're going to talk more about that. So hopefully this makes sense. So you see on the left side, the energy, the intensity, and on the bottom, you see the frequency range. So it's really a combination of the intensity and the frequency range, which is the basic of the signal. So the stereo effect you also see when you look at the 2020 signal in the back there, you see there's a gray and then there's a red behind it. And so that's kind of an attempt to graphically show that. So the idea really of the cloud is to activate all cells in the body. So what we see here is a superimposition. So you can see that there's these 2 waves that are actually working kind of like simultaneously in different ways, which then sophisticates and diversifies the signal even more so. And then you see here's a rhythmic entrainment where they work with different rhythmic patterns also, and they get also entrained into the signal. So you can see there are layers and layers of ideas that are basically coming into coming to play. Why I put this slide up was just to bring back and to summarize. So there is a superposition. There's the entrainment, the rhythmic entrainments that you just heard. And then there's a folding of the cloud mat, which then leads to greater intensity. So what we see here is there's a molecular activation that takes place on a physical level that leads to a biochemical reaction, which then leads to healing response. So it's like a domino effect that through the activation of, you can say, 20 million molecules in a 15-minute session, those 23 million molecules activating lots and lots of other molecules over a period of 12 hours, for example. So that's why we say it's great if you can actually use a cloud twice a day. So that's, Dr. Kafka says that would be most optimal as a minimum input to really make a physiological change. So if you want to use it 4 times, 5 times, or you want to use it all day long, you could actually do that too. There's no contraindication for that. It's just not necessary to use it all the time. So, but then it depends, certain conditions where you may be in an acute injury or so, where you want to really get on it and do it multiple times a day. So now we are looping back into Luis Ignarro, who is the inventor of the nitric oxide molecule. And he even said, he says, this may finally be the century of electrotherapy. PEMF therapy is simple, cost-effective, has no known side effects. And yes, he actually discovered the nitric oxide. There were other people involved in that too, but he was like one of them. And so the Nobel Prize is actually one of the highest. It's the highest prizes that you can actually get for anything, accomplishments. So he also said there may be no disease process where this miracle molecule does not have a protective role. Now, think about that. That's just so profound. There might be no disease process where nitric oxide does not have a protective role. And that's what we're going to explore now, because this is a very kind of powerful principle. So what we see here in the upper left corner, we see calcium ions combining with calciumoline, and they together with the eNOS, which is the endothelial nitric oxide that's produced in your vascular system, creates nitric oxide. And through the production of nitric oxide, we then see all these cascading physiological effects, like the anti-inflammatory effect, the increased blood flow to the tissues. We see even pain and inflammation going down. We see more blood vessels growing. We even see help with collagen production. And we are actually seeing effect with growth hormones and so many other things. So this is just an overview slide, how there is this movement that PEMF actually activates this combination of calcium ion with calcium, I think it's called calciumoline, or calcimoline, and that creates the combination of both, which then leads to nitric oxide. So it's just, we don't really need to understand everything about this. We just need to understand what actually happens. And so what happens is, in pulse electromagnetic field therapy is really a non-invasive way of using electromagnetic fields to generate these pulsating fields that then cascade into biochemical reaction. And so one of these reactions is the nitric oxide effect. So what is the big deal about nitric oxide? So once you actually really get the umbrella perspective on what nitric oxide does, it becomes very obvious. So it regulates cardiovascular function. So it's majorly important with blood pressure regulation. It's important with oxygen transport, with blood perfusion, and more we find out, the research is pointing out more and more how important this is, also for all the interaction that happen on the glycocalyx, the inner lining of the arteries, because strokes and heart attacks are still the number one things that most people die from these days. So we want to pay attention to that. But we also see that there's a neurotransmitter effect, there's a gastrointestinal effect. It helps with learning, and it even helps with the lengthening of the telomere within the DNA. So there's definitely a longevity connection also here. So it helps with mitochondrial production, stem cell mobilization, immune system regulation. It's anti-inflammatory, and it even helps with a clotting system and so on, right? So now here you just see one, just by looking at the brain effect, so it leads to enhanced learning, better memory, better neuroplasticity. It's neuroprotective. So it actually helps us not to lose more brain cells or slower, and also to helps us with better functioning of the brain that we have left. It helps us better sleep. And also with stress hormones like cortisol, it blocks the production excess. So it has a regulating, modulating effect. And as you can see, it even works on the neurotransmitters. So here we also see that the direct effect is a study on the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is very important for keeping your brain going, and the direct connection with nitric oxide. And here's a good snapshot of just looking at the effect on menopause also, because nitric oxide also helps with the pituitary and the hypothalamus regulation, and it helps with the luteinizing hormone. LH stands for luteinizing hormone, and that is actually important for leading to better estrogen production in the ovaries, and that kind of changes obviously after menopause. And so the nitric oxide molecule helps with the modulation also in this transition from perimenopause into menopause, for example. And you can see also at the bottom, estrogen declines with age. And so we can see now that that nitric oxide, the endothelial nitric oxide, goes down, and so that becomes an issue. So we need to kind of make sure that we can do anything possible to keep these nitric oxide levels up in some way. And there's also a whole connection to the gut, which we're just going to skip. And is again more connection to the brain. And then when we look at all the effects of nitric oxide, we see how it inhibits mast cells. So that means a histamine response. So allergic response is always histamine driven. It helps with epithelium. Those are the inner lining of the mucous membranes, which are really in the lungs, in the gut, everywhere. Sinuses, mouth. So this is very important because these endothelial mucus forming linings in our body are all very immune connected. Then it helps with reducing oxidative stress. It helps with the vascular system. Angiogenesis means better formation of new blood vessels. And also it reduces cytokine release, which is always related to inflammation. And inflammation really drives all chronic disease. So here you see now how the nitric oxide production, you can see here at age 20, it's at its peak. And by the time we are like hitting like 60 or 70, that nitric oxide severely declines. So, and that then drives hypertension and all kinds of circulatory problems, right? So we can see now what drives this low nitric oxide production, right? So, okay, the age is a major factor, physical inactivity, bad diet, all kinds of garbage that we put into our bodies, even proton pump inhibitors, which are really antacids, right? Because why? Because nitric oxide is also has a major function in the stomach. So if we take antacids, we really knock out even more nitric oxide. Antiseptic mouthwash, which kill the conversion into nitric oxide in the mouth and all the pollutants. And last not least, stress. So there are many mechanisms how we drive down nitric oxide. And one of the outcomes is arteriosclerosis. So here you see the progression from the 20s to the 60s. That's how we built up plaque. This is why people get strokes and heart attacks, right? Nowadays, people get already strokes and heart attacks in their 30s. Now, this process has even speeded up because of all the stress and all the pollutants and all the craziness that we engage with as humans. All right, so here's a quick look at a scale from 1 to 10. On the top, this person has perfect blood pressure, and on the bottom, the person has severe problems with their vascular system and has a heart attack or stroke. So you can say each of us, we are all somewhere on the scale, right? So it's just a matter of where are we on the scale. So in order to find that out, there are multiple ways in how to do that. We do that also in our clinic because this is one of the things that I'm very passionate about, preventing strokes and heart attacks with all of our clients. And so in the preventative field, there's a lot we can do. We just have to embrace this also from a diagnostic standpoint. So here you can see at point number 3, it says clinical signs and symptoms of low nitric oxide. So you are realizing already that very early in the disease process, nitric oxide actually crashes, right? So we want to, that really reinforces a point that we want to stay on top of good nitric oxide production. And here you also see the results. Lack of muscle stamina, right? Lack of brain endurance. Now, sexually, that can also show up because the sexual organs are highly vascular organs. So when the blood flow doesn't happen to the peripheral tissues, then we can notice these kind of dysfunctions. So now, what is underlying all this is also that either we have enough energy or we don't. So when we look at a lack of energy, you can say actually that most degenerative diseases, if not all degenerative diseases, are somehow associated with a lack of energy. Because that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? The molecular activation, which directly correlates with mitochondrial function, which as a little, you can say factories, energy factories inside the cell. So where ATP is being produced. So if the energy goes down too much, then we're suddenly dealing with all these chronic illnesses, right? From pain to brain problem and cancer and cardiovascular disease. You can make a list with hundreds and thousands of symptoms, right? So in the moment we raise the energy, what happens is a total shift. Everything in our body works better, right? And our disease risk goes down because if we have energy, we have better brain function, we can work out better, we make better choices in our lives, we are emotionally more balanced, and we're really counterbalancing any kind of aging process. So the whole concept of anti-aging, because it's a very kind of, you can say abstract idea, but it becomes very concrete actually when we look at life from this perspective of low energy. So to complete this, so you can, if you look at the major illnesses, right? The major illness of hypertension, which many people have in their 70s, right? Many people. Obesity, overweight, dyslipidemias, which drive all the cardiovascular diseases, right? So most of them, let's put it most of them, not all. There are also other problems, but many strokes and heart attacks are normally driven by dyslipidemias. Then there's diabetes, right? So the moment you have diabetes, your chance to get a stroke or heart attack are like, or any kind of vascular event are like much higher, right? So we have to understand that dyslipidemias are really important and they don't produce symptoms. So you can imagine you're like in top shape, but if you can be completely plugged up, and that's why great athletes suddenly roll over with a heart attack or stroke, and everybody scratches their head and say, well, Joe was in such great shape. How is it that he got the stroke? Well, because it has nothing to do with it. You can be in top shape and you can still have a massive propensity towards a heart attack or a stroke. So one needs to really get to this with the right diagnostics. So anyway, heart failure, arteriosclerosis, we talked about that. So you can see all these major illnesses, they're all associated with a dysfunction of nitric oxide. Isn't that amazing? And the endothelial dysfunction that you see up there in orange, that is the inner lining dysfunction of your vascular system. That drives so much disease. So the key now is, how do we pull strategically at the right string in order to deal with all these diseases, which are just multiple ideas and concepts of the same problem, right? And so this is really where the cloud comes in. Here you can see a picture of the cloud. It helps us to perform better, to protect our body, and also to recover when we, for example, work out or when we have and dealing with any kind of illness process. So this is how that looks when you are lying on the cloud. These waves are kind of 24 inches actually coming up and also going 24 inches down. So you can actually use this also as a blanket, and from both sides, it doesn't really matter, and it will completely penetrate your body. There are 5 different programs: relax, balance, energize, synchronize, and transform. Because what's the idea behind these programs is we want to get different results. So for example, when you wake up, you want to get energized. When you want to go to sleep, you want to relax. So you want to calm things down in your system. And then when you're dealing with imbalances in your nervous system, or you're dealing with disease processes, you want to have their own program. So this gives you multiple possibilities to engage with different challenges, health challenges. And each of these programs also functions in 5 different intensities. So you have the chance to run any of these programs in 5 different intensities. So you have a total of 25 different possibilities. And there will be more programs coming out in the future also. So here you see, it just kind of points, it's all the things we already talked. It's completely wireless, which is wonderful. You can also program it from your app. So if you're, let's say you're lying on your cloud and you feel like you want to change the program, you can also do that on your app. Most people, but you can also, for people who are EMF sensitive, you can completely disconnect the cloud, not the cloud, the Bluetooth, and in that way you have 0 EMF practically. It's also very user-friendly. Here you see the app-driven idea. Okay, that was a little too fast. What I wanted to say here is that they did an experiment, and so in this molecular activation, that they did, they used a Petri dish and they put fibroblast cells in there. And so there are basically two Petri dishes with fibroblasts in them, and they watched it over a period of 24 hours. So fibroblasts are really involved in wound healing and connective tissue healing. And so they did this experiment. So they exposed one of the Petri dishes for 15 minutes by the cloud, and the other one, they didn't do anything with it. And then they watched what would happen over the 24-hour period to both of these Petri dishes. And this is what you see. The lower one that was treated with a cloud, there was much more activation of the fibroblasts. And that's really, even though this is outside of the body and not in vitro, but in vivo, it's a very powerful testimonial also what actually happens in terms of molecular activation. And so the molecular, how does this really work, right? Because you can think, how is this possible that I do this 15 minutes treatment and it has such a profound effect, right? And this is the answer. Because the molecular energy activation that happens where you can see the ball is rolling from the left side up the hill, and then it rolls down, and then you get this reaction energy, and that leads to this domino effect of the biochemical reactions in the body. So we're dealing with a physical activation that leads to a biochemical response. So here's a beautiful idea. So you can see when you go to the upper left corner of the slide, you see the activation energy. If the activation energy actually goes down, that means as we age, we have less energy, as we have dealing with disease processes, as things don't work, as we don't work out, and there's so many things like that we can do that are detrimental to our health. The activation energy goes down, and it leads to catabolism, which is breakdown of tissues. And a breakdown of tissues is normally associated with a breakdown also of our health. Now, when you go back up to the top point there of the hill and you roll down now on the right side, okay, let me see. Okay, yes. So then you see it goes from a biophysical application, that is really what the cloud is, to a molecular activation leading to a biochemical reaction. Remember, I talked about the domino effect, the nitric oxide production, growth factor, cell renewal, tissues and organs and glands, and all these systems are being addressed and recharged, right? Now, this is just the opposite now of what we were just discussing before where there was a loss of energy, right? Now we're actually dealing with a complete reversal of that. And that leads really on the right side now to repair, to rebuilding of tissues, restoration, and regeneration. And we can call that anti-aging if we want to, but we don't need to. We can also just say, there are immediate effects, there are progressive effects, cumulative effects. And then we see this expressing in health and healing, performance, and longevity. So this is actually a beautiful summary of how the cloud can, on one hand, not only activate us of body physically, but also metabolically, and lead to these astronomical health benefits. And here you see the foldable application. You see when you fold the cloud, every time you fold the cloud, you basically double the effect, right? So it's wonderful. So if you have a bellyache, for example, you can first lie on the whole cloud by treating your whole body. We always want to do that. And then you can fold it up and you can put it on one body part. Or if you get the set of the larger cloud and the smaller, here you see a picture of the smaller cloud. They normally come as a set. So then you can also fold that one up and you can use that, for example, on your shoulder while you're lying on the cloud, and you can get both treated in a 15-minute session. Just wanted to just say just a couple words about horses. There is a cloud set. Here's a wonderful story of somebody's horse, and that horse had a parasitic infection that affects the nervous system. And so you can see how the horse is walking. Now the man there's holding the horse so horse wouldn't kind of fall down barely, right? And that's actually what happened, that the horse would often fall down. They had to bring a tractor to lift it back up. So the horse was dealing with this parasitic infection that was affecting the nerves, and they tried all the drugs and everything, and nothing was working. So now the next option was to put the horse down, but they decided not to do that because somebody came along and introduced them to the cloud. So they said, okay, let's do the cloud, and that's what they did. 2 treatments, 15 minutes for 1 month, and then now we see what happened. This is now after 1 month of treatment. You see it's late fall now. So you can see how the horse has a whole different energy. I mean, anybody can see this, right? So yes, there's still a way to go. It's not perfect yet, but much more stability, right? And so this is beautiful, and this is exactly what we see also with humans, that we see people who are really using the cloud, experiencing all kinds of wonderful recoveries with all kinds of processes. And it's not, as I was saying before, because people always ask, well, will it help with this or will it help with that? Look at that horse, right? Isn't that beautiful? Now, that horse was pregnant, actually, and she gave a small baby horse not too long after this. And so everybody was very happy. Yes, here you see them. Claudina, they called the small horse Claudina. Okay, wonderful. So yet, just for the completion, there's also currently there is a big study running in Vienna, Austria. It's the Sigmund Freud University, where they're working towards 1,000 test subjects. They're close to like half of that at this point, and they have already seen amazing results, which are unfortunately not available yet because we really want to finish the study, but we're already seeing amazing results in so many different areas of sleep and energy and performance, brain function, and so on. And so all kind of, in a way, the results that many of us are already experiencing as cloud users. And this is my last slide. I just want to, I'm going to get out of the show here and I just want to see you all for just one moment. I want to